Chris Bennett, our speaker here, deserves a vast amount of credit for not only helping me understand the history and putting together the first chapter, but also the fifth chapter on the history of Prohibition. Because the history of this plant is incredibly fascinating, and the history of its prohibition, I think, even more so in some ways. And Chris has gone out of his way for decades now, learning about the history of this plant and its different ancient uses and what people did with it, and teaching people. And he's written 3 books, Marijuana, Green Gold, The Tree of Life. Green Gold, The Tree of Life, Marijuana, Magic and Religion was his first one, published in 1995. And then Sex, Drugs and Violence in the Bible came out in 2001. And then, messed this one up. 2010 was Cannabis and the Summer Solution. His final book really tied it all together for me and many others, not only including the Judeo-Christian history of cannabis and its prohibition, but including what's happened in Islam and in the Middle East and the prohibition or discrediting of hash and cannabis in those regions, as well as in India, where the use of this plant dates back beyond writing, and the history of its use in those regions and its eventual prohibitions or bans is quite fascinating, and it took Chris a long time to really learn the details of that. He's done a brilliant job in his recent book explaining that. And so I really commend Chris for doing that work, and I really enjoy having him come to our conventions. I think he's only missed 1 or 2 in all of these years, and so I think we have most of Chris's past talks on our YouTube page, and so if you want to do some research there, please do so. And this one here as well will be spread around YouTube. You have to bear with us in order to make the images as clear as possible for yourself and others. We're actually going to turn the lights right down so you guys can get a much better view, so that folks watching online won't have as good of a visual in some sense of Chris, but hopefully people will enjoy the images that they're able to see there. I don't really have a lot more to say. I really want to get Chris up here to talk about the use of cannabis and alchemy and the occult. So I'm going to just get him to come on up here, and thank you so much for making it over from Vancouver, Chris, where he's got his Ermin Shaman. I should also say he's got the world's most incredible little psychedelic drug shop over back in the back corner of Mark Emery's hemp store there, which is an amazing place. If you've never been there before, you'll be amazed at how many drug plants you've never heard of before. So thank you so much for If you want to just talk, you got a good voice.
Yeah. Okay, so Ted asked me to speak about the occult, and the occult is what's been hidden from us, and when it comes to this plant, so much has been hidden from us. Oh, I guess I'm going to need some lights, because I gotta be able to read.
That's too dark.
That's good.
Oh,
maybe
this
the back.
is so tricky, man, you have no idea.
That's good.
Well, I got to be able to read.
No, that's not good.
It's not going to change either.
They all go on, or none of them go on?
It's kind of one or the other. I don't know what the fuck to do.
Oh,
Okay, well, I guess we'll have faded images, unfortunately.
Sorry, Chris.
You
I
can't-
wish I could shut
We
that
can't
off.
shut these lights off, eh? Like, just...
Believe me, it's like the most fucked up lighting system I've ever seen.
Wrong way.
Good morning. Open this door.
There you
There we go, that works. Well, no,
You can't read though.
I can't read, yeah, unfortunately. Anybody got a light or something?
I got a light. It's funny, it's like I punch it and then they'll do 6 things.
Some of the light systems are set up so if you press.
Shut it off, Ted, shut it off for a
second.
sec.
Something else happens.
Sure, yeah, just
Shut it off.
Okay. Okay, so this kind of like takes the heat off me with the audience, because I can't really see people's reactions, which is good, Do I need the mic, or am I pretty good like this? Okay, well, I won't hold the mic, that makes things easier. So Ted's invited me to speak about the role of cannabis in the occult. And the occult means what is hidden. And so much has been hidden about this plant from us, and it's been rediscovered in the last couple of decades. Look at the whole history of hemp. People even forgot the term hemp. And then even when I first heard it, although I've been smoking cannabis by decades by that time, I didn't even know what it was. Hemp, what's hemp? Hemp's marijuana, you know? And then all of this incredible information started re-rising from the lost depths of the unconscious and started reoccurring. And that's so true about cannabis. And in previous lectures, I've talked about some of that incredible history of cannabis. And here, I'll just try this later instead. And so I've talked about things like the role of cannabis in the ancient world going right back, you know, for tens of thousands of years now, according to archaeological evidence. People have been growing cannabis using hemp fibers. And for thousands of years, it's played a role in religion, even thousands of years before Christianity. And I've talked a lot about the ancient Scythians who burned cannabis in tents and inhaled the fumes, or the ancient Assyrians who burned cannabis in temples in order to invoke the words of the gods, or the ancient Hebrews who burned cannabis inside the tent of the meeting and covered themselves in cannabis-based anointing oils to bring on the word of God. And early Christian Gnostics who continued this practice. And much of this history was suppressed when it came around to the Dark Ages and the rise of the Catholic Church. And information in general, science, knowledge, was totally suppressed for close to 1,200 years in Europe. Knowledge went back to Stone Age levels. There was no medicine. There was no book besides the Bible in print. And the Bible itself was only printed in Latin. And you had to be a monk who read Latin in order to understand it. And this caused a real separation between humanity and the spiritual world. In many ways, they weren't having their own religious experiences anymore. They were being told what to think and what to do. The only way you could access God was through the Catholic Church and through the priests, bishops, and popes. And that all kind of came to a peak about 1000 BC. In 1000 BC, there was this big apocalyptic belief that it was the day of the Lord. There's a line in the Bible, a day of the Lord is 1,000 years. And in 1000 BC, AD, they thought, oh, it's the end of the world. And people started burning crops and stopped farming and stuff like that. And then it never happened. And they suffered for a couple of years after because it thrown everything completely out of whack. And so they decided they wanted to go back to the Holy Land, back to Jerusalem, which they'd lost birth with, in hopes of rediscovering and rekindling the faith that they'd lost touch with. And in the Islamic world, the situation was much different. Although Islam is seen as quite suppressive and prohibitive now, back then there was all the works of the ancient Greece philosophers, all the works of medicine and science and stuff like that. It was all still there and still growing. When they went back there, this is what they discovered, and it totally refurbished the European worldview. And so this gave rise to, this is kind of a tricky version. There we go. I guess I just got to hit the button on this once in a while. And so this gave rise to the Grail mythology when they went back to Europe, and that was the idea that they could somehow rediscover the Grail. And the Grail itself was thought of as this wonderful cup that if you drank from it, your health was revigorated and the environment around you regained its fertility. And it made food taste good as well, funnily enough. And this was really influenced when the Knights Templar, 11th, 12th century group of knights, went into the Holy Land and came into contact with a group known as the Hashishins. And Hashishins is where we get both the words assassin and hashish, and I'll discuss some of that later. And so this is from Gunet Renaud in The King of the World in 1927. All traditions allude to something that from a certain time become lost or hidden, such as the Soma of the Hindus and the Persian Grail, or draft of immortality. These latter having a very discrete connection with the Grail, which is said to be the sacred chalice which contained the blood of Christ, another draft of immortality. Returning to the Grail itself, we can easily see that this primary significance is basically the same as that of the sacred vase, which is found and which is notably in the East, is that of the sacrificial vessel. He originally held the Vedic Soma, or Mazdaean Haoma, or the draft of immortality that bestows upon or restores to those who take it with the requisite disposition, the sense of eternity. And so this is like Soma and Haoma. That's the subject of my last book, and as I showed from that, these were actually preparations of cannabis. And so next image, please. Just hit the right. Oh, back one. There we go. From Scythia to Camelot. This is by Professor Scott Littleton, and he actually wrote the back page plug on my book, Cannabis and the Soma Solution, is very much in agreement with cannabis with Soma. And he shows that the Scythian myths were actually the origin of the whole Grail mythology and Camelot mythology. And the Scythians, of course, were this ancient cannabis-using culture that spread the use of cannabis throughout the ancient world. And so the idea that these things are not connected, is also from, they were also the gatherers of Heoma, the Scythians. So they were the ones collecting and distributing cannabis throughout the ancient world. And so these ideas, that, there's nothing really radical that I'm saying here, connecting this whole Grail mythology with the history of cannabis. So the Templars went back into the Mideast, and they came into contact with the Hashishins. And the Hashishins were, of course, these hashish-using heretics amongst the Islamic world who had these mountaintop fortresses in Alamut. And we'll throw up image 3, please. And as the legendary and sensationalized 13th century account of the assassins by Marco Polo recorded, prior to the fall, novices being initiated into the sects were alleged to have been tricked through the use of hashish and a hidden garden within the mountaintop castle of the assassins in Alamut into believing they had received a foretaste of the afterlife paradise described in the Quran. And this is from Marco Polo. The Grand Master of the assassins, when he discovers a young man resolute enough to belong to his murderous legion, he invites the youth to his table and intoxicates him with the plant hashish. Having been secretly transported to the pleasure gardens, the young man imagines that he has entered the paradise of Muhammad. The girls, lovely as houris, contribute to the illusion. After he has enjoyed to the satiety of the joys of the promised by the prophet up to his elect, he falls back to the presence of the delights he has just tasted, if he will take part in the war of the infidel as commanded by the prophet. And so here we see this whole idea of the assassins. And it's interesting to know that cannabis was actually found on Osama's compound when they recently busted Osama. And these terrorists now are kind of acting on the same idea that they'll be rewarded for their acts of terror, blowing up planes and whatnot with beautiful virgin girls in the afterlife, and that's what drives them to it. And they're still using cannabis, so this is like a long-standing tradition. Next image, please. However, Dr. Michael Aldrich's view is that the drug employed for initiation into the cult was used to obtain a vision of paradise. It did not nerve them up for slaughter, was not used during their missions, and did not make them crazy. Quite the contrary. It gave them at least a fleeting glimpse of an altogether higher order existence. If anything, political and religious intrigue, not hashish, caused assassination. The origins of the term hashishin has been a matter of much debate. The etymology of the word assassin is said to have come from hashishin, i.e. hashish takers. Bear with me. It was transmitted through the Romance language by the Crusaders, who in the 12th century, fearful of the sect, associated their daring killings with the power of the drug. Others claim that the name hashishin is derived from the Persian assassin, which holds connotation of healer or herb seller. Still others see the origin of the name as coming through the followers of Hassan, in reference to the prominent figure of the cult, Hassan I-Sabah, who is known variously as the Old Man of the Mountain, the Sheikh of Almat, and the Keeper of Hashish. Next image, please. The nickname, and with it the drug's extended use, appears to have surfaced during the late 11th century, and both may have been promoted by the real or alleged use of cannabis by sectarians who are engaged in spreading the vast network of open and secret influence over the Muslim world. Contact with the Templars, and this is where we get to the Holy Grail stuff. And next image, please. It has long been suggested that, well, on their sojourn to the Islamic-controlled Holy Land, the European Knights Templar, who appear in medieval legends as the guardians of the Grail, became associated with the use of hashish through a trade of goods and knowledge with the aforementioned assassins. And the Templars brought back the occult use of the drug to Europe. And many writers have written about this. The Alamut formula, for want of a better name, was a legendary brew containing hashish. It was prepared at the mountaintop fortress of Alamut, established in the 11th century by Hassan I-Sabah. Members of this sect drank or smoked hashish in order to become immortal. The fortress was ransacked in 1256. It is said to have contained a large library and an alchemical laboratory. The idea behind the Alamut formula was based on hashish may give us a clue to the concept of the Holy Grail, which came into being during an era of transition between antiquity and the Middle Ages. It was supposed to be a substance or an object, sometimes associated with the body and blood of Christ, that vouchsafes happiness on earth and bliss in heaven to a chosen few. You can understand the Holy Grail both as a mystic or magical remedy and a sacrament. Now, this was used by the hashishins in death and rebirth ceremonies, actually. And when they took hashish, they actually thought they were died, but not only did they think they personally had died, according to witnesses, they had been lying there, like seeming as if they were dead. And this was also something that developed out of ancient worldview. Zoroastrian accounts also refer to the devotees taking cannabis in very powerful extracts and going into a state known as star, which was a death-like coma. And from these death-like comas, they'd awake with revelations that are really the basis of a lot of the doctrine in Zoroastrianism. And so this was an idea that filtered in. The Zoroastrians were in Iran, and that's where the Ishmaelis rose up as well. And many of the Ishmaelis were Zoroastrians that converted to Ishmaelism, or the Hashishins, under the, if they didn't, they could face death if they didn't convert to Islam. As Jesus' crucifixion is said to, and so this goes back also to Jesus' crucifixion. And his own death and rebirth initiation, the great resurrection. And this plays a role, as we'll find out, in both the Grail mythology and the Knights Templar. As Jesus' crucifixion is said to have taken place during the Passover, it's interesting to note that hemp may have been widely available at this time, for according to the comments of Emmanuel Lowe, actually I want to run through the next two images. This is the Passover plot, and this is a book by Hugh Schofield that is about Jesus' crucifixion on the cross actually being faked with some sort of substance that threw him into a death-like coma. Next image. Holy Blood and the Holy Grail also visits this mythology in a book that's largely about the Knights Templar and Freemasonry, and also goes into the Templar association with the assassins. As Jesus' crucifixion is said to have taken place during the Passover, it is interesting to note that, as hemp may have been widely available at this time, for according to the comments of Emmanuel Lowe in his German ethnobotanical text, Die Flower der Juden, the Passover incense contained cannabis resins, and this was written in 1926. A connection that has been made even more curious by a Talmudic reference that states, the one on his way to execution was given a piece of incense and a cup of wine to help him fall asleep. Next image, please. More than a century ago, R.R. McMeans wrote that some high biblical commentators maintain that the gallon vinegar, or mirrored wine, offered to our Savior immediately before his crucifixion was in all probability a preparation of hemp, and even speaks of its earlier use, and that was in 1860. And then more recently, Holger Kirsten has commented, how did Jesus come apparently to die immediately after he had taken the bitter drink? Was it really vinegar that he was given? Perhaps the supposed drink of vinegar instead contained the active ingredients of the sacred drink of the Indians and Persians, soma and hilma, respectively. Soma, the sacred herb of India, enabled an adept to enter a death-like state for several days and to awaken afterwards in an elated state that lasted a few days more. In this state of ecstasy, a higher consciousness spoke through the adept, and he had visionary powers. In addition to the Asclepius acidia that's still used in soma in India, the soma might have also contained Indian hemp, Cannabis indica. Tradition has it that it was featured in the drink of Zarathustra. Zarathustra is, of course, Zoroaster, the founder of the Persian religion. Now, in high doses, cannabis will actually throw you into effects of hibernation and catalepsy. Catalepsy is like a rigor mortis-like thing, and William O'Shaughnessy wrote about giving patients really high doses of cannabis and then lifting their arm up, and it would stay there. And in the 1950s, the U.S. government Army was doing experiments with cannabis. They actually put a dog into a state of hibernation for a number of days. They thought it would revolutionize battlefield medicine, because they'd be able to take somebody that had been injured on the battlefield and slow down their body processes to a point that would slow the blood flow, bleeding, all these types of things, until they were able to get them to a place where they could do the proper medical help. However, we know through the hashishins and Zoroastrians that this type of information had long been known in the East. Next image, please. Emily Murphy, the famous Canadian prohibitionist, also known as Janie Canuck, in her famous work of cannabis propaganda, The Black Candle, wrote that eminent medical doctors in India, principally Calcutta, have made experiments with cannabis indica and have discovered that it induces symptoms of catalepsy, or even trance. It is also claimed that the fakirs of India who suffer themselves to be buried and who are later disinterred do so through the agency of this drug. Some years earlier, Dr. James Bray of Edinburgh wrote a monograph on this subject entitled Trance and Human Hibernation. Next image, please. And there's another image of a fakir just being disinterred from the ground. And I have some great accounts of this in my book, Cannabis and the Sober Solution. And I discuss the evidence for the idea that the resurrection and crucifixion was all an elaborate hoax in all three of my books. Next image, please. And the next Templar, Dr. Camelia de Sico, I imagine that's how you pronounce it, in his paper, The Medicine of the Templars, recorded that the Templars created a mixture of pulp of aloe, pulp of hemp, and wine of palm called the elixir of Jerusalem, with therapeutic and nourishing properties. Conceivably, a connection might be noted in the fact that Holy Jerusalem was one of the names used by hashish by Sufi groups in medieval times. Jerusalem was also the place where Jesus was crucified. And the Templars, interestingly enough, were arrested for heresy, secret rituals, sacraments, and mocking the cross. Next image, please. Now, the cross is pivotal to Catholicism and the power of the church. And Elaine Pagels, in her book on the Gnostics, wrote that the doctrine of the resurrection serves as an essential political function. It legitimizes the authority of certain men who claim to exercise exclusive leadership over the churches as successors of the Apostle Peter. From the 2nd century, the doctrine has served to validate the apostolic succession of bishops, the basis of papal authority to this day. Gnostic Christians who interpret resurrection in other ways have a lesser claim of authority, and they claim priority over the Orthodox, and they are denounced as heretics. The Gnostics actually refer to the belief in the resurrection as the faith of fools. And this is actually from a 2nd century Gnostic text. This is like 1800 years old. And then they wrote in their own time, and this is why they were largely suppressed for this view. They will cleave to the name of a dead man, thinking that they will become pure, but they will become greatly defiled, and they will fall into the name of error and in the hands of an evil, cunning man and a manifold dogma. There shall be others of those who are outside our number, who name themselves bishops and also deacons, as if they have received their authority from God. They bend themselves into the judgments of the leaders. These people are dry canals. And so this is what they thought of. These were Christians, and this is what they were writing about the Catholic Church and their takeover of the Christian tradition in the early period of Christianity. And and so this is what was what the Templar were up against when they were mocking the church. This was a direct assault on the foundation of the Catholic Church. Next image, please. So on Friday the 13th, and this is where we get the bad luck associated with Friday the 13th in 1307, the Knights Templar were rounded up and burned at the stake by the Catholic Church. And then, next image, please. After the papal bull of Innocent VIII in 1484, cannabis became associated with witchcraft, and its use was driven underground. It was considered the devil's sacrament, and so it was completely prohibited. And next image, please. One brave philosopher who dared to challenge the ban on hemp in medieval Europe was the Benedictine monk Francois Rabelais. And he was a bachelor of medicine and a Benedictine monk. Rabelais was familiar with the alchemical writings of the Sufis via Avicenna, as well as the Templars, referring to the good Knights of Templar a number of times in his works. And he has his heroes drink heavily as a good Templar did. And the Templar had that cannabis-infused wine I was referring to. Indicatingly, he was most likely sympathetic with their cause. He had his heroes drink heavily, as did the Templars. Like the Templar, Rabelais suffered the harsh persecution from both the Roman Catholic Church and the civil authorities. The papacy and political rulers were angered over the content of his famous books, Gargantua and Pantagruel, which made a mockery of both church and state, and also contained many hidden references to things occult. We are here more concerned with the books of the good Pantagruel, which is based around the parody of the Grail myth. The book of Pantagruel also contains references to hemp that were written esoterically. These were banned for some centuries by the church. Next image, please. The Life of Gargantua and Pantagruel by Francois Rabelais is an esoteric work, a novel in Kant. The good cure of Meldoun, that's Rabelais, reveals himself in it as a great initiate, as well as a first-class Kabbalist. And Fulcanelli was actually the last of the great alchemists, And he wrote that in 1926. He himself was likely a cannabis user. They refer to a special resin that he packed around in a little box that gave him many of his inspiration. Rabelais himself makes reference to the esoteric content of his work. This is in his introduction. Following the dog's example, you will have to be wise in sniffing, smelling, and estimating these fine and meaty books. Swiftness in the chase and boldness in the attack are what is called for. After which, by careful reading and frequent meditation, you should break the bones and suck the substantious marrow. In the course of it, you will find things of quite a different taste and a doctrine more abstruse, which will reveal to you most high sacraments and horrific mysteries in what concerns our religion, as well as the state of our political and economic life. Francois Rabelais. So he makes pretty clear reference that he is hidden things in these books, and those who read and meditate upon his passages will find things of a hidden nature, and I did that. I spent a long time, read the book twice over. In Pantagruel, Rabelais gives us a distinct description of hemp, which he calls the herb Pantagruelian. The leaves sprout out all around in the stalk at equal distances, to the number of 5 or 7 at each level. And it is by the special favor of nature that they are grouped in these 2 odd numbers, which are both divine and mysterious. The scent is strong and unpleasant to delicate nostrils. Rabelais goes on to describe the familiar applications of hemp, pulp, and fiber. Next image, please. With this herb, kitchens would be detested, tables of dining rooms abhorred, although there was a great and plenty of variety of most dainty and sumptuous dishes of meat set down upon them, because they wouldn't have coverings over them. And the choicest bed also, how richly soever adorned with gold, silver, amber, ivory, porphyry, and the mixtures of most precious metals, would without it yield no delight or pleasure to the reposer in them. There'd be no sheets on them. Without it, millers could neither carry wheat nor any other kind of corn to the mill, nor would they be able to bring back from thence flour or any other sort of meal whatsoever. They wouldn't have ropes and bags and those types of things to put those things in. Without it, how could the papers and writs of lawyers, clients be brought to the bar? There would be no paper. Seldom is the mortar, lime, or plaster brought to the workhouse without it. We would tagged with in canvas and these types of things. It was also added to lime plaster and cement-like mixtures that are being rediscovered today. Without it, how would one draw water that was got out of the draw well? In what case would tableons, notaries, copyists, makers of counterparts, writers, clerks, secretaries, scriveners, and such persons be without it? So he was kind of an ancient Jack Harrow, or a medieval Jack Harrow, and his knowledge of cannabis. And he goes on and on like this for quite a while. I'm just giving some short examples. These were 4 or 5 chapters on cannabis. Next image, please. Rabelais tells us the hero of his tale, Pantagruel, a giant named after the said herb, loaded for a voyage. Amongst other things, it was observed how he caused to be fraught and loaded with a herb of his called Pantagruelian, not only of the green and raw sort, but of the confected also. The confection Rabelais refers to likely as the edible Turkish delight, hashish confection. Rabelais was so enamored with hemp that in his estimation it stood at the very pinnacle of plant life. In this Pantagruelian, I have found so much efficiency and energy, so much completeness and excellency, so much exquisiteness and rarity, and so many admirable effects of a transcendent nature. Next image, please. And so here's Rabelais here again, as an old man, going over some of that stuff. And next image, please. It should be noted that, oh yeah, sorry, maybe. In the Encyclopedia of Rabelais, which goes over a lot of the esoteric stuff in Rabelais' Pantagruel Gargantua, Pantagruelian is described as mood-enhancing hashish and the philosopher's stone, which was the goal of the alchemical tradition. And it should be noted again that Rabelais, amongst his other titles as monk and bachelor of medicine, was clearly an alchemist. Next image, please. On the title page of Gargantua and Pantagruel, Rabelais refers to his persona M. Alcofrabius as the extractor de quinte essence. The alchemical title refers to one who is extracted from ordinary matter, the 5th essence, that perfected substance, elixir, known in alchemical terms as a philosopher's stone, or pharmacon athanasius, the perfect medicine. The quintessence contained the magical power to prolong life and redeem the flesh. According to the Rabelais Encyclopedia, the same substance was hashish, derived from cannabis, otherwise known as the herb pantagrueling. Next image, please. Now, alchemy came to us was rediscovered to us through the Islamic world, and many Hashishins and Sufis that were users of hashish were also alchemists and wrote about hashish recipes and uses in medicine in their still surviving texts. So we know that this is the case. And as Dr. Michael Aldrich recorded in the High Times Encyclopedia of Drugs, skilled alchemists with pretty classy lab equipment experimenting with all kinds of potions. If Gerber, who was a famous Sufi alchemist, and others could distill alcohol, they could have made hashish or even hash oil. And indeed, Geber included Ban, which is cannabis, among his powerful prescriptions. An amusing tale of the hypocritical priest from Arabian manuscripts dated around 950 Common Era shows that the use of Ban was secret and spread among religious persons who professed against it. So even people that were saying they didn't use hashish used it secretly in the Islamic world. And next image, please. Medieval alchemists used cannabis vapors to clear the mind. Hemp oil was distilled from flowers for use in various formulas. And this is something I got from a book on chemistry. So, you know, the idea that I'm talking about here isn't anything really too radical. Next image, please. This is Heinrich Kunrath's The First Stage of the Great Work, Amphitheater of Eternal Wisdom. And we see the alchemist here in a closed-in tent-like structure with incense billowing beside him. And they would put the incense inside those tents and inhale the fumes in there. And in the smoke, in the smoke is written in Latin, ascending smoke, sacrificial speech, acceptable to God. On the cross being above if you take a look at the top there, there's a seven-pointed thing hanging from the roof, which is the chandelier. It looks kind of like a pot leaf. And around it's written, without the breath of inspiration from God, no one finds the great way. So you need the smoke and the breath of God in order to find the great way. Next image, please. Now this is another wonderful alchemical illustration. If you look at that shape of those two caves, it's almost like a human skull with the right and left brain and their various attributes marked out in there, the separating and analyzing left brain versus the right brain, and the scooping up from the waters of the unconscious. And in the middle there is almost like a pineal gland-like image with the angel. And then we see the alchemist again inside the tent with this burning incense. And according to many sources, this would have been a cannabis infused preparation. And this later, you know, through alchemy, flowed into a number of secret societies. Because all this stuff was like heresy at this time. You could be burned at the stake for practicing these types of arts and having this type of knowledge. It was completely a threat to the church, as was science. And science grew out of alchemy. And so, next image, please. And here we see an alchemical water pipe. And this guy puffing on it. So, you know, it's pretty clear that they were picking up lots of techniques and ideas from the Mideast. And the next image, please. Jan Potocki was an original member of the Illuminati, and he wrote the manuscript found in Saragossa, a tale in which the hero is often unsure whether he is awake or dreaming under the influence of hashish. And he has a series of dreams within dreams and stories within stories that are filled with the imagery of occult and alchemical initiation. And European cannabis use remained quite secretive until the advent of the mid-19th century group, the elite, the club, the Hashishins, a name inspired by the nickname given to the hashish-using Ismailis. The club members would gather together once a month, costumed with turbans and daggers, and the prince of the assassins would go from member to member, offering a spoonful of hashish with the statement, "This will be taken from your share of paradise." The elite group included some of the most famous and creative artists and authors of that time. Alexander Dumas, Victor Hugo, Théophile Gautier, Baudelaire, Gerard Nerval, Balzac, and others, and was founded by Dr. J. Moreau, an expert on the effects of hashish. Next image, please. Moreau wrote, there are two modes of existence, two modes of life given to man. The first one results from our communication with the external world, with the universe. The second one is but the reflection of the self and is spread from its own distinct internal sources. The dream is an in-between land where the eternal life ends and the internal life begins. The published works of the members of the Hashish Club are now considered classics. They extol dignity and freedom of the individual. Most of the members of the Hashish Club were steeped in esoteric knowledge, and many of them wrote extensively about hashish in their works. Next image, please. Alexander Dumas included in his Count of Monte Cristo an encounter with the hashish-eating Sinbad the Sailor, whom he based on Hassan I Sabah, the assassins. Next image, please. Club member Gerard de Nerval, who lived from 1808 to 1855, used the word supernaturalist to describe what we moderns term as high, and in the following excerpt reprinted in the Book of Grass. And since you have had the prudence to cite one of the sonnets composed in the state of daydreaming by the Germans called Supernaturalists, you might hear them all. You will find them at the end of this volume. They are hardly more obscure than the metaphysical of Hegel and the memorabilia of Swedenborg, and would lose charm by being explained if such things were possible. So he's talking about his own texts, which were written under the influence of hashish, and his Voyage to the Orient is a fascinating book full of occult lore and rich with the scent of hashish. Next image, please. A fellow member of the Hashish Club, Charles Baudelaire, wrote that on occasion the personality disappears, that concentration on the external, which is the hallmark of all great poets and master comedians, grows and dominates your outlook. You become a wind-whipped tree, regulating all nature with your organic music. Now you sweep formless into the immensity of an azure sky. And next image, please. We know that members of the Hashish Club in Paris were well aware of Rabelais' esoteric references to cannabis, for one of their most prominent members, Théophile Gautier, who lived from 1811 to 1872, made cryptic reference to it when describing his hashish visions. What bizarrely contorted faces, what abdomens huge with Pantagruelian mockeries. All the Pantagruelian dreams passed through my fantasy. Gautier also made some very interesting comments on the effects of hashish. I was in this blessed phase of hashish, which the Orientals call a ki. I could no longer feel my body. The links between matter and the spirit were broken. I moved by my will alone in the atmosphere which offered no resistance. In this way, I imagine souls behave in the world which they go after death. And so these guys are doing, very strong preparations of cannabis. They would take 2 or 3 grams of this very potent Mideastern hashish and stir it into strong coffee and then take it orally. They weren't just smoking it for its mere pleasurable effects. They were doing large ingestions of very powerful psychoactive substances. And this is really clear in their writings. Next image, please. This is Louis Alphonse Cahagnet, and he was also experimenting with the hashish at the same time in France. And he was a student of both the teachings of Swedenborg and Mesmer. And in 1848, he published The Sanctuary of Spiritualism, which recorded the remarkable visions of test subjects who had been administered extremely potent extracts of cannabis. These subjects documented visions of death and the afterlife, experiences identical to those now known as near-death experiences. And these are some excerpts from Cahag's book, and I actually have the only English version of this book that I've ever even seen. I've had 2 French versions as well, which I sold at profit. There is not one of these ecstatics who, after emerging from this state, has not felt a desire to thank God for such an initiation, and each has found himself penetrated with these truths. Does not a medicine exist, which I dare only whisper to you, which is that of the Word, the living Word, which says, let that be, and that is. The medicine of the Christ, of the saints, of all the Tharmargists, that is alchemists generally, of the cures of the touch in country places, of our satyrs, of non-lubiances, of faith, of the will, a medicine, the virtue of which may even be included in the mere name of a plant. I have perceived that this substance has no other effect but to increase morally and physically the faculties of man. The name of God has in it something magical in this state. It penetrates the ecstatic with a holy respect and a pure love, which leads him towards celestial raptures. And he turned on this other guy, Pascal Beverly Randolph. Next image, please. Pascal Beverly Randolph was a 19th century mulatto sex magician. He was half black, and he was actually New Lincoln. He was very, very successful in the United States. And he was a Rosicrucian, which is a secret society that was based on a lot of occult knowledge. Dr. Pascal Beverly Randolph considered his use of Arab cannabis products as part of a much older esoteric tradition. And this is from this book here about Randolph. Randolph, as the French mesmerist before him, found that hashish constituted the perfect food for the soul. If he had been searching for years to find the wine of life, the elixir that would perfectly restore the depleted vital fluids that served to connect the soul to the body, he had found it in hashish, the real secret of the wisdom traditions. And next image, please. As Randolph himself explained, there is no doubt that Confucius, Pythagoras, and his disciple, the alchemical Hermetus, Illuminati, and mystic brethren of all ages used it to exalt them while making their researches for the Philosopher's Stone, secret of perpetual youth, and the elixir of life. You know, and it should be noted that the oldest woman who ever lived, Phula Naik in India, who lived to be 126 years old, she smoked cannabis every day, and she attributed her long life to the use of cannabis. And this is also something about cannabis that was written in by ancient Chinese Taoists and other groups. This idea that it prolongs life, and it's actually an antioxidant. And so many of the science that we're finding out about cannabis actually indicates that it is like a perfect medicine for, making you live a longer, healthier life. And Dr. Bob Melamede himself has given lectures on this and written papers about cannabis's potential for a longevity medicine. And next image, please. Helena Blavatsky was a really important figure in the New Age and occult traditions. Her society, the Theosophical Society, is still in existence, and it was largely responsible for bringing ideas from Hinduism and the mystic traditions of the East to the Europeans of the 19th century. She was also an important figure in women's movement. She was a great suffragette. And her lifelong friend recorded her saying, A.P. Rawson's recorded her saying this: hashish multiplies one's life 1,000-fold. My experiences are as real as if there was ordinary events of actual life. I have the explanation. It is a recollection of my former existences, my previous incarnations. It is a wonderful drug, and it clears up profound mysteries. And next image, please. Aleister Crowley, I'm sure many of you have heard of him. He's almost as controversial as drugs themselves with the ideas that people have about him who've never read his works. He lived from 1875 to 1945. He was a master chess player, a great mountain climber, and a philosopher and a practicer of magical arts. And in his essay, The Psychology of Hashish, the Herb Dangerous, written in 1907, he recorded the following: that he found this one constant story, stripped of its local chronological accidents. It usually came to this: the writer would tell of a young man, a seeker after hidden wisdom, who in one circumstance or another meets an adept who, after sundry ordeals, obtains from the said adept, for good ill, a certain mysterious drug or potion, with the results, at least, of opening the gate to the other world. The potions identified with the elixir vitae of the physical alchemist, or one of the great tinctures, most likely the white tincture, which transforms the base metal, normal perception of life, to silver, poetic. And that's from Crowley's Psychology of Hashish. Just grab a drink of water before I continue. Everybody can hear all right and stuff?
Yeah.
Awesome. Next image, please. After poisoning himself with every drug in and out of the pharmacopoeia in search of that preparation, Crowley came to believe that this substance was a sublimated or purified preparation of cannabis indica. Preceding the theories of R. Gordon Wasson, Jonathan Ott, Terence McKenna, and others by more than half a century, the great and wild beast 666 went so far as to speculate that this ceremonial intoxication constitutes the supreme ritual of all religions. He further hypothesized that this mysterious herb may in fact have been one of the prohibited trees in the Garden of Eden. If not the tree of life, at least the other tree, double sinister and deadly. In question to Jehovah's ancient taboos, the beast retorted, "Nay, for I am of the serpent's party. Knowledge is good, be the price what it may." In the Psychology of Hashish, Crowley indicates a vast knowledge of the esoteric history of the herb, quoting the works of fellow hemp enthusiasts such as Zoroaster, the medieval alchemists, the works of members of Paris Hashish Club, and other 19th century figures. Crowley translated Hashish Club members' Baudelaire, Poem of Hashish, and published it in his magical journal, The Equinox. Unfortunately, he was forced into holding back much of his knowledge due to his association with certain occult groups who believed that secret revealed equals power lost. In order to keep this paper within limits, he wrote, it would be necessary to keep the article to a scientific nature and use information that was readily quite available to the public at large, lest the austerity of such a goddess be profaned by the least vestige of adornment. Well, I'm not bound by any such obligation, so I could speak quite freely of my own knowledge of cannabis, luckily. Next image, please. As Crowley took his magic word, Thelema and its law, do what thou wilt, from Francois Rabelais, Gargantuan Pantagruel. And in Gargantuan Pantagruel, Rabelais has this Abbey of Thelema. And the law of Thelema is do as thou wilt. And many people think this is some sort of horrible devil-worshipping statement about your right to do anything with anybody. But really, Rabelais believed that it was prohibition which caused people to do bad things, and that if people were given freedom to pursue their own will, they would find out that doing the right thing and doing good unto others is what really gives the greatest satisfaction, and they would discover that on their own without the prohibitions of and rules and such. And so it was really a philosophy of following your free will and finding your path in the world. And this may have led to what Crowley's, these were very, this is the pivotal, Thelema and do as thou wilt. That's the main epitome of Crowley's philosophy. And so he likely picked this up, his knowledge of cannabis, from Pantagruel as well. And in his 1923 diary entry, he stated that Pantagruelium was an elixir of stone. And trink, ecstasy, conferring omnipotence. The bottle of trink is also from Rabelais and was identified with the magical wine that bestowed wisdom and poetic powers. And in his Book of Wisdom or Folly on the Terror of the Egyptians, the Book of Thoth, Crowley wrote again at length on hashish, a piece entitled De Herbo Sanctissimo Arabico, the most holy grass of the air, appears in both these books. Again indicating the source of his inspiration, the Book of Thoth, in a paragraph directly preceding the essay, Crowley writes, I cry aloud my word, as it was given unto mine uncle, Alcofrabius Nassier, the oracle of the bottle of that book, and the word is trink. Alcofrabius Nassier is an anagram for Francois Rabelais. And as we know, this was about a holy bottle of wine that provided poetic inspiration and delights. And as we know, Rabelais was writing about esoteric references to cannabis and was familiar with the Templar use of cannabis-infused wine. And the following piece of Esoterica, which is taken directly from the beginning of the most holy grass of the air, is steeped with occult symbolism. Next image, please. Recall, O my son, the fable of the Hebrews, which they brought from the city of Babylon, from how Nebuchadnezzar, the great king, being afflicted in spirit, did depart from among them for 7 years' space, eating grass as doth an ox. Now this ox is the letter Aleph, and this is the Atu of Thoth, whose number is 0, and whose name is Mat, Truther, Mot, the All-Vulture, the All-Mother, being an image of Our Lady knew it, but also it is called the Fool, who is Parsival, Durain Thar, and so referreth to him that walketh in the way of the Tao. Also he is Crowley, the child horse, working upon the lion and the dragon. That is his immunity with his own secret nature. Now Parsival is the guy who discovered the Grail in the Grail legends, and he discovers it in India and brings it back, and so he's tying in the Grail with this. This is in relation to the Fool card in the tarot, which is attributed with the number 0, which is very important. It's like it's being in the Tao. It's like being in the here and now and present. It's not being influenced by your past or future thoughts, but in just being completely present in nature here. And so this is like a pretty high piece of esoterica written on cannabis. And in many ways, like in the Grail mythology, what happens is, let me turn the lights on now. And in the Grail mythology, what happens is the king is dying, the Fisher King, and he's sick and he's wounded, and as a result, the fertility of the land and the kingdom around him is suffering as well. And so they go to find the Grail in order to heal the king so that the wealth and happiness of the kingdom itself might be restored. And in many ways, when you pick up the cannabis torch and you become an activist, you're playing the role of Parsifal, the modern man who's this king who's lost his way. And it restores our land where we're seeing our forests cut down and turned into pulp and paper, or we're pulling up petroleum oils from the earth and polluting our air. We can switch to hemp fuel. And it also heals the body of man. It's looking like cannabis helps the cure to cancer and many other ailments. And it's also discovered that many religions, Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, all cannabis had a play at the beginning of these religions, at their inception. And we're rediscovering that now. And just as the Knights Templar rediscovered it in the 11th and 12th century and brought that back to Europe, and that revitalized the European culture and led to an era of people like Shakespeare, who himself was also probably a cannabis user. I've interviewed two professors who tested pipes from Shakespeare's property in Avalon and found evidence of cannabis resins after having a theory about Shakespeare's sonnets. And Dante, the great poet as well, was familiar with hashish, according to Dante's scholars. So we see how this totally revitalized areas that had been suppressed through the Dark Ages, and it offers us that same opportunity today. So that's about all I have to say on that. This particular talk, it can be about whatever, if you're familiar with anything I've written about me, something you want to ask. Any questions?
I have a question. I heard of Soma through Aldous Huxley and
Yep.
Brave New World.
Yeah.
Do you know any connections?
Well, he wrote a fictional account. He wasn't really referring to the Vedic thing. He just used it for, and in his view, the Soma of Huxley's Brave New World is kind of like a way of nullifying man so that the government and stuff like that can take more control of them. But if you take a look at the Soma of the ancient world, it had a completely opposite effect, and it was prohibited by governments because of the same sort of, this prohibition that we've seen now, this has played its role out many times through history, and there's been times where cannabis has risen to prominence, and times where it's been suppressed into non-existence, and times where it's risen to prominence. And hopefully this time we can raise it out there once and for all, and hold it bright and proud.
Yeah.
So how many years have you studied the field of cannabis, my friend?
I've been since about 1989, 1990, I've been writing and researching the role of cannabis in history.
Over 20 years.
Over 20 years. It's been very fulfilling, I've really enjoyed my time as a cannabis activist. I think it's given me a sense of fulfillment more than anything else that I've ever done.
Awesome.
Except for maybe having a son, raising my son.
Aww, yeah.
Anybody else?
What's the next line of research now that you've done the ancient world?
Well, I've got a book half written about cannabis and the occult, but I haven't worked on it in like over 2 years. I'm working on a movie right now, Cannabis Roots, The Hidden History of Marijuana. In November, I held a conference, Ted spoke at it, and I also had Professor Carl Rudd, Dr. Michael Aldrich, Dr. David Hillman, as well as Michael and Cynthia Horowitz, who are great drug historians, all speaking at it, and we filmed interviews with them, and we're still collecting interviews. And my partner that I'm doing the film with, Mark Lokeed from Kush.ca, was in China filming a 2,700-year-old Caucasian mummy that was discovered with 2 pounds of manicured female cannabis. And eventually we'll go to India and film sadhus and babas and Nihang Sikhs and Islamic Sufis that are still using hashish as part of their own mystical traditions, as they have for centuries, if not millennia in some cases. Anybody else?
I heard that, and I don't know if it was verified, that an archaeological dig in Egypt, they found coca.
Well, there's
Implying
this,
that East-West trade.
Yeah, what
earlier.
they found is evidence of coca inside, inside the mummy, like that the mummy had used coca. They didn't actually find physical evidence of it, as well as nicotine. And this has led to a lot of controversy about contact with South and North America and Egypt. And interestingly enough, there have been Peruvian mummies that have been found with evidence of cannabis in it. Personally, I went over a lot of that information and I write about it at length in my book. I'm suspect of it, a lot of these chemicals, they work in our bodies because they mimic endogenous chemicals, the endocannabinoids of our system in the case of cannabis. And other substances, they look for markers. They don't get the exact identification of these substances, but there's certain chemical markers that they can use to identify it. But some have said that this was probably, maybe a combination of things that were used in the embalming process of mummies, the mummification process, and that may be what they're discovering. Others are saying that perhaps somehow something happened in the areas where these mummies were capable. These were deep tissue analysis. And the mummies also in Egypt also found evidence of cannabis. There's likely a lot of cannabis evidence in Egypt as well. So yeah, it's a bit controversial. There's a lot of debate about it. I'm sliding more with that. That's a bit of a jump. I think I need to see more.
So cannabis would have been introduced to the West when?
Likely with the Europeans coming over, bringing hemp and then it taking off and growing in Mexico and places like that. So I'm guessing likely then. There's not a lot of evidence for cannabis prior to the arrival of Columbus and whatnot. What there is pretty controversial. Not accepted by most archaeologists and whatnot.
I was just wondering just about how widespread the use of hemp was back in older more medieval Europe, just like how.
Well, the hemp was in use. They were definitely growing hemp cloth. Monks were known to eat a hemp seed porridge. It was around. Likely, if the alchemists were using it, they were dealing with pretty weak cannabis, and that was likely a large reason for the need for all the alchemy to get something that would actually be usable out of such swag.
Now, when people refer to Manila rope, which is what you...
That's a type of different...
That's hemp, isn't it?
Well, Manila hemp's a different plant, just got
Right.
the hemp name on it, but it's not cannabis-related plant. That was kind of in competition, but the actual cannabis hemp was much sturdier rope and stuff like that, and much more sought after. There were like whole wars fought over access to hemp. Whoever controlled the hemp controlled the seas because of sales and caulking and all those types of things. So it was like a really sought after commodity. Anybody else? All right.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. He's an incredible wealth of knowledge about this plant, and I can't learn enough from him. And I really, really appreciate all the work.
Okay, well, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Oh, don't go
And
anywhere.
for those people on YouTube, we're actually going to make this video again, but we'll just show the images so the dark part you won't have to put up with. So you'll be able to learn more again watching that. Chris spoke so darn fast, you probably want to watch it again if you
That's
want to
for
learn
sure.
more about that. So thank you very much for coming, Chris. I guess